In today's episode, we're joined by someone whose work sits at the powerful intersection of literacy, access, and impact. Meredith Delaney is the Director of Philanthropic Strategies for the Scripps Howard Fund, where she leads initiatives that aren't just about giving books, but about rewriting the future for children across the country. Ms. Meredith has led the Scripps Howard Fund's If You Give a Child a Book campaign to advance one clear goal: putting books in kids' hands to build a more literate, empowered next generation for all. In this conversation, we explore why early childhood literacy is a game changer, especially in the unique gaps in current programming that her work at the fund fills. What it takes to move from an idea for change to realizing actual systemic change, and how storytelling, both on the page and in our communities, can unlock futures. Hi, Ms. Meredith.
Hello, Harini. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How about you?
Also doing well. Super excited to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Excited to have a conversation with you as well. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Yes, of course. And all right, let's dive into it. So you and the fund work on such multifaceted projects focused on childhood literacy, and of course we'll discuss their impact. But first, I want to ask, how did you get involved with the fund in this space?
Yeah, so the Scripps Howard Fund has been a part of a childhood literacy initiative for 10 years now. We are headed into a decade of being within this space, which is just so incredible to think about. And, you know, being connected to the E.W. Scripps Company, which is a media company, one of the things that is critical when it comes to being good citizens and good consumers of news is to have that foundational literacy piece established when you're really young, and it helps you determine what is right, what is wrong, what is truthful, what is not truthful. But aside from that, it really just builds a foundation for who you are and the successes that you can have well beyond just that initial period of time when you're learning how to read. So at that time, 10 years ago, the Scripps Howard Fund really kind of looked into what other organizations were doing in the childhood literacy space. And I can tell you that what was found was that the majority of large national organizations were really focused on a population of children from birth up until about age 5 when kids go to kindergarten. And that is a crucial time frame. As you know, that's when there's a lot of brain development happening. And it's so important for kids to have resources and for parents, especially new parents, to have resources. And not only, resources outside of the home, but resources inside the home. And so all of those organizations were doing really impactful work. But what we found was that once kids enter into kindergarten, a lot of those support services just automatically drop off. There's kind of this assumption that once kids enter into kindergarten, they have all of the resources that they need right at their fingertips when they're in school. And that's a somewhat accurate assumption, but kids don't spend 24 hours a day in school. They still come home and they need a lot of learning initiatives. They need access to books. And so we saw that space as as filling a critical gap in services, which is why we created the If You Give a Child a Book campaign, which focuses on kindergarten through 3rd grade, also during a very vulnerable and important time in kids' lives when they're learning how to read.
Yes, that's wonderful. And I've also, had the privilege of working with the fund and the If You Give a Child a Book campaign as well. I remember it was, I believe, Harry Potter's 25th anniversary a few years ago, so I got to work with the fund and with Scholastic for that. So that was just
Yes.
one example of the brilliant initiatives that the fund has going on for sure.
Yes, yes. Scholastic is our partner in all of this. And so the If You Give a Child a Book campaign provides free Scholastic book fairs to children in Title I schools. And Title I means that the majority of children are underserved. They are socioeconomically underserved and often on the free and reduced lunch program within their school. And so, if you think about it, there's really an opportunity with the Scholastic Book Fair to ensure that all kids have the opportunity to participate, which is why we provide them for free. Because sometimes book fairs could be the most joyous day for a student if their parents were sending them to school with funds in order to purchase the books. But Scholastic Book Fair days could also be a really sad and challenging day for children whose parents simply just did not have the means to send them to school with money that day. And so when you make it a level playing field, it can be a transformational experience for kids, helping them build their home libraries, and it's all for free.
That's wonderful. And I know we discussed the work that, the fund does in terms of increasing access to these books and thereby, sort of grounding those childhood literacy outcomes that maybe sets the fund apart from other organizations in the space. So let's talk about childhood literacy as a whole. So why is it such a powerful entry point for broader educational access and opportunity for these children?
Yeah, it's a critical time for children, and making sure that they have access to all of the tools within their toolbox is it's so important. Because if you think about it, Harini, if your mom were to say, "I need you to build a table," but she didn't give you a hammer, she didn't give you nails. She left you to your own devices to go to the local hardware store and figure out how to, get all of the supplies that you needed. Those are some pretty steep obstacles to overcome, right? Um, but with childhood literacy, there are so many different components. It is about book access. It's about making sure that there are books in the home, but it's also making sure that there are so many supportive resources in the school and outside of the school to ensure that all kids have the opportunity to learn and learn at their own pace. So we know that third grade really plays a pivotal part in the educational success when it comes to childhood literacy and learning how to read. So up until third grade, kids are learning how to read. And then this magical transition happens within third grade, and you really start shifting from learning how to read to reading to learn. And if that magical transition doesn't happen right at that point in time, unfortunately, the school keeps kind of on this trajectory where your peers might still be at that point learning or reading to learn, but you might be a little bit behind the curve and you're still learning how to read. And when you don't hit that point in time, you fall behind. And you fall behind not only in reading, because as you know, really it's kind of at that third grade, fourth grade marker. You have to learn how to read in order to succeed in all of your other subject matters as well. So it's not just an issue of kind of falling behind in reading. It then provides this ripple effect where unfortunately you're falling behind in all of your other subjects, and it becomes something that kids often feel ashamed about, or feel they lack confidence then in reading, and sometimes they can just shut down and say, well, I don't like reading. And that may not be the case. It's just they're struggling, or they're a little bit behind. And so we play a part. We're a slice of the pie in a really big pie, in order that equates into childhood literacy and successful learning outcomes in reading. But we really try to provide so many resources, the love and support that kids need, especially in that K through third grade space where kids are learning how to read.
That's wonderful. And I know we talked about both academic and the emotional benefits of access to childhood literacy. And I know like a lot of the times we think about it as purely academic almost, but you really touched on almost the emotional impact that it can have on students as well, these initiatives. So, what does access to books really mean for a child's emotional development, especially in under-resourced communities or Title I schools like the ones that the fund works with?
Yes. So reading books and having exposure to many different books really helps build a child's social emotional development. And books can serve as windows, where if you think about a window, it's opening you up to a new world. It opens you up to new possibilities. It unlocks potential, right? It's exposing you to things that you may not be able to see within your current sphere, your physical sphere of influence, but it takes your mind there. And that's a really important part of growth and social emotional development. Books can also serve as mirrors. And when you read a book where you can see yourself in a character, or you can, you see your family represented within a character within a book, it provides validation, right? And again, it kind of opens up these new worlds of possibilities where you think, oh, well, I see myself in that character, but I didn't realize that I could be as strong as she was. And so books really teach us very important lessons when we don't even know it. They teach us empathy, they teach us kindness, they teach us respect for others, they teach us that it's okay to be different. And those are really important life lessons and values that sometimes you'd rather hear it from a book than hear it from, maybe an adult or a teacher. It might even sink in with you a little bit more when you're learning it on your own in that private world that you have between you and that book.
Absolutely. And we've been really talking about, the positive effects of these initiatives and access to childhood literacy on these students. But of course, when it comes to, education and these efforts, there's so many different stakeholders in terms of their communities, their schools, their libraries, their families. So how important exactly is community level involvement, such as, the aforementioned schools, libraries, and families, in ensuring such literacy efforts do succeed for these students?
It's a great question to ask, and it's one that I will say, in order to tackle the issue of childhood literacy and the disparities that are currently happening within our country, it takes a village. So when I say that we're a slice of a pie, book access certainly plays a role in all of this, but it's really important for the schools to meet students where they are and to have the supportive, programmatic, academic environment where kids can potentially have tutors or have special reading courses to help bring them up to speed, and not in a shameful way, in making reading fun and making sure that they're set up for success before they get too far down the road where it's just harder and harder to kind of bring them back up to reading at their appropriate age level. And libraries, oh my gosh, play such a critical part in book access as well. Um, Harini, one of the reasons why our program is especially important in low income pockets of our country is that sometimes access to libraries is really difficult. They're almost in a library desert, if you will. And then transportation can sometimes become an issue. Or there's almost this fear of, oh gosh, I think I have an outstanding library fee, right? And so that's something that libraries are even thinking about as well from a book access standpoint, and how do we kind of level that playing field. But when we all work together and we all understand that we each have a slice of the pie and this is a solvable problem, but none of us can solve it independently without working in tandem with one another. It is just it's empowering to think about what we can do, how we're changing lives, but we do need more people and more local nonprofits or local governments to think about even additional resources, because there are still kids that are not being, the needs of those kids are not being met when it comes to childhood literacy. And so we've got to think about how to ramp up and address the gap in needs.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned also the gap being able to sort of the gap needing local nonprofits and local governments to step in. And what do you think, from your experience, are maybe some practical ways that schools, local governments, or smaller nonprofits can create almost a sustained culture of reading, of fostering that childhood literacy beyond just, one-time donations or a minimal commitment?
Yeah, this is the question that we all this is what keeps us awake at night, I think. And it's a great question to ask, and I'm not sure that I have the right answer. But again, I think it's probably thinking about how that student in a Title I school shows up to learn that day. And you almost have to think about all of the obstacles that they might face, even just before they get to school, right? So they may not have the loving and supportive homes that you and I come from. And they may struggle to put food on the table. And so those kids might be coming to school with a hungry belly, and that makes it hard to learn, right? So when you think about all of the challenges that that child has to face before they even walk through the door at their school that morning, and then all of those barriers return to them as soon as they leave that day, and they carry those heavy burdens with them throughout their school day too. We have to think about, as a society, how do we meet all of those needs? Because if we are only focused on just our piece and staying in our lane, we are ignoring an even bigger issue with that entire child. And so we have to think about ways to partner, collaborate, and do it intentionally, and really kind of think about eliminating barrier by barrier by barrier, in order to just free that child up of some of those really heavy burdens that they have to carry, and for their families to carry as well, and ensure that they have all of the tools that they need to succeed while they're in school that day, but also be able to succeed and have an open and free and safe mind to learn and read whenever they're in their home too.
For sure. And it's definitely that kind of an effort, which it needs to be multifaceted and working on those different levels to really meet these, like you said, these children's needs. Because at that point, it goes beyond academic and it goes beyond literacy almost, to be able to provide it to them.
It does. And when you look at it just from purely those literacy stats or those academic stats, it's almost a disservice to the child to think that, that they aren't, especially coming from, really underserved or impoverished areas of our country, that they're not struggling with things that are completely unrelated to academics, but that certainly has an effect on those things.
For sure. And that was the first half of our conversation, and it's been going great so far. We've really touched on some really important aspects of the work you do in childhood literacy. So I'm very excited to dive back in with part two.
Great.